Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel? Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel? Can you feel it?
Hello, friends. Welcome to Forsa, the podcast that dives in to explore the nature and experience of being alive. I'm your host, Tracy Breathnach, performance artist, writer, researcher, mother, lover, all-round deep diver into embodied experience. What does it feel like to be alive? How can I describe it and communicate it? How can we learn from each other's experiences of aliveness? In the series, I talk with a wide variety of guests, artists, activists, educators, spiritual teachers, writers, guides, shamans, to find out more about their experiences of the force, life force, energy of life, elixir of life, source, whatever we might call it. I hope it brings something new to your experience of being alive.
Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel
I am so excited to welcome my guest today, Jules Heavens. Jules is, well, it's difficult actually to put into words what she is, to me at least, but going by the book, she is a naked voice facilitator, a poetry as medicine carrier, amongst a whole variety of other trainings in healing. Her spiritual inquiry has spanned over 40 years, and she's been facilitating women's groups and circles for the last 30. She also offers one-to-one coaching sessions. The circles Jules creates weave and combine movement, meditation, and breath work, poetry, voice exploration, inner inquiry, and ceremony, all experienced within carefully cultivated sacred space. And it's within this context that I met Jules in Wales almost 15 years ago. She was my first spiritual teacher. She was the first person to help me see and hear the fullness of myself and my voice. And we went on to collaborate on a number of performances, including a phenomenal community production of the Vagina Monologues by V. I know she has profoundly impacted the lives of thousands of women, including my own, with her work that she describes as a feminine path that remembers wholeness. So, Jules, thank you so much for being here with me on this very new podcast series. And one of the things I suppose I did as I had this idea for it. Well, I had an idea for a podcast because a friend said you should do a podcast. And I was like, okay, I'll do a podcast. And then it was like, what would it be about? And what interests me enough to talk to lots of different kinds of people that might be something that lots of different people might have something to say about. And for me, one of the themes, since I've been a teenager, that has been really present through all of my wonderings about life is, what is it, the thing that enlivens us? What is it, the thing that is this life energy of life? What is that life force? And so sometimes I do that. I look at that directly in my work or in my training, or I look at it in my relationships with people and nature or whatever. I wonder about, can I feel it? Is it tangible? So that's how the theme came about. And then my next step was, who do I know that I feel more alive with when I am in connection with them? And so as I'm sitting here ready to speak to you, like, I feel the blood in my veins and my heart is open. I feel really excited and happy. And that's always been it for me, that when I have worked with you over many, many years, really learning to open to my own aliveness and my own human beingness. And, slowly at first, and then more and more as the years passed. And I am so grateful for that, really, with the work with you.
Thank you. It's very, very touching to hear, actually. Yes. Yeah.
I wonder if we could start with, I'll go with the very first time. Well, it's the second time I met you, because I met you in a meeting, first of all, but that very first workshop we did at Pontedawe, and using naked voice. So I had no idea what to expect. We were in a room of all women, and I didn't know most people there. And then there was an invitation to just use our voice to maybe sing our name or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, you know what? Just let myself go that much. And terrifying. And I did it, and I didn't die. So I came back and continued to do it. And I'm sure you've had that kind of response over the years, you know, when you bring this work out to people, this idea of making ourselves naked, of the authentic, of what we can open to and just let go. And I just wondered if you wanted to say something about that kind of practice, because it's in the naked voice practice, but it's also all of the work that you do with women in particular. You know, what is the experience like? What are the barriers to it? What is it for yourself, perhaps even in your own journey?
Well, just to say, my own journey has certainly been that. And even today, this is another element for me sometimes of that being open and vulnerable and not knowing what's going to come. Yeah, which is what the naked voice was very much about, although it wasn't necessarily verbal words in that specific sense. But yeah, it's that, I guess my work is about remembering all of ourselves, whether it is the tools of naked voice or any of the others that I use, because I feel and sense for myself, and certainly with those that I generally meet and work with, that we've all, for various reasons, which maybe we'll talk about, clamped down in our own ways with our own innate aliveness. Yeah. And each of the tools, each of the paths that I weave are doorways that I sometimes boldly open with others, and sometimes I just show them the path towards it, like you experienced, you know, to realize, self-realize, I'm not sure what the word is, but it's that opening to what is inside and allowing that its fullest expression, which isn't necessarily like huge amounts of sound, but it is the authentic truth of our own being that, for whatever reasons, has been shut in, shut out, suppressed, you know. And we do it ourselves. I'm not saying it's necessarily done from the outside. It's what we've learned right from the very, very first breath, probably in some cases, to go, oh, I can't do that. And, you know, when we each, in our own ways, like I know your own path has taken a beautiful direction with the body and movement, you know, in our own ways, that we find that truth of ourselves again, that energy comes back, our aliveness, which was never gone, but maybe had a lot of doors closed, shut tight on them. They can come back. And yeah, I think that's probably where I'll stop at this moment. I've sort of noticed I'm running into the sand all of a sudden.
Well, it's so visual as you're describing it, and I'm also, because I see you on the screen, I'm getting all of the gestures as well. So my body is really feeling this upward energy, upward and out energy, and the door as being the thing that would shut it down and keep it in. And I'm tracking in my own body of, like, you know, since I was probably a teenager, I had a lot of difficulties, discomfort with my throat, and I used to get tonsillitis as a teenager all the time, and that continued into adulthood, and continued until really like, so people would say, oh, you're just not expressing yourself. That doesn't help. So
No.
whatever the pattern is that's preventing me, that
Mm.
makes me feel unsafe to express myself, doesn't get resolved by somebody saying I just need to express myself,
Mm.
because the pattern is so set, it's so automatic in my system.
Yeah.
I can't just go, oh yeah, oh there we go, I'll open the door,
Yeah.
all fine now.
Yeah.
So for me, that process of recognizing it in my body as something that happened when I felt a certain way, and then with you learning it as a kind of defense mechanism and being able to track really how that is a pattern and it plays out, and this happens, and this
Mm.
happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this is how I end up feeling, generally withdrawn, withholding, tight, contracted. Um, so literally life force not coming out, but also not coming in. So
Exactly.
it would be both, that I
Yeah.
refuse it in and I won't let it out. And that really, the throat seems like that real gateway of connection between, the head and my mouth and my eyes and my body, where the feelings are being experienced.
Yeah. And it's that piece around, as you've just named, it's not necessarily about what comes out, although that often needs to happen because it's a bit like a volcano and a lot of people that needs a bit of a release to start with. But it's that permeability then, that open vulnerability, that nakedness that allows also the connection to everything else, you know. So it's not just about our own individual expression, although that's maybe what is unplugged to start with. To me, it's then the gate. I use a gate rather than a door, maybe for some reason.
Sure.
The gate that opens to actually feeling and experiencing connection to others and to generally to life, that life force that exists, whether it's a stone, a river, a tree, a human, a four-legged creature, you know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in that permeability, that conversation or that listening, it isn't necessarily a conversation, but that listening, I think, can really bring us into a much deeper awareness of who we are and who we aren't, meaning that, the specifics of our own being and also the vastness that isn't us. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel when we started talking about the expression, I was on the vertical
Mm.
axis. It was up and down, and when you're talking now, I feel like a sort of horizontal out from my heart, that the connection is out and in as well.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
both are happening all the time.
Which is that beautiful symbol of the cross, the equal cross of the heart. It's that allowing up, allowing down, and then this with everything, you know. And I know for myself, and this is very time specific, in this last year of lockdown, I mean, that's an interesting word in itself, isn't it? There have been times of exquisite connection to the world of non-human. I remember, I think it was the second day, I can't remember the specific date, but the second day when it was all declared, that was it. And walking out on the moor near where we live, and there were no planes. Funnily enough, I just hear a plane now. There were no planes, there was no traffic, and there was this exquisite experience within me of that connection to everything at that moment. And that was gorgeous because it helped actually keep everything going when human connection was so missing. And I noticed in the winter this year, sort of January, February this year of 21, how almost a depression was coming in because the lack of social connection, as much as Zoom is gorgeous, and it is providing us something, but that lack of sort of sitting with a group of women in a room, I really missed. And because it was winter and it was howling outside on many occasions, I wasn't going out. And I could feel the contraction coming in, that lockdown within myself. And those exquisite moments of memory helped. I mean, they were little beacons in quite a dark, for me anyway, personally, quite a dark time. And you talk about life force and aliveness. I felt quite, dead's not the word, but suppressed and very contracted in. Fascinating. I've never experienced anything quite like that before. Wow. It was quite a dark place, actually.
Yeah, I think in the last year, people have experienced states, and maybe over long periods of time as well, that are very new, because so many of our lives have been radically altered. They're radically different to what they were, and sometimes we manage and cope and adapt, and sometimes we don't. And there are periods of just, I don't even know what to do. I don't know who I am anymore. The identity, in a sense, is the thing that for me, I noticed in the first few months, just falling away of, oh, I don't have to do this, so therefore I am not this. I'm not doing this, so I'm not this really either. And as those things fell away, it's like I'm left now with not knowing, and what happens then, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I also had put myself through 3 different processes all around death. Let's be clear. So one was about walking with the grief of the world, another was death celebrancy, and then another piece with one of my spiritual teachers was very much about facing death. So, you know, I put myself deliberately in that cauldron to really look at death, grief, etc., etc. So it was no surprise in some ways that I went into quite a dark journey into the underworld again. I say again because it's been there before, but not in quite this intensity. And then the whole, you know, pandemic situation was also within it. So but it's interesting because coming out, I'm feeling an aliveness in a different way. And it's quite new. It's quite a tender place of like new shoots coming up through those pavement stones or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah. So I do feel an aliveness, but it's quite different. It's not a pushing. I think one of my old patterns that I thought I had resolved, but maybe I hadn't, was the push to aliveness. But I'm not quite sure what else to say about it, but it's in facing grief and loss, as you were saying, you know, I think most of us have experienced our roles suddenly dissolving, going, whoa, okay, that is not there anymore, and that's not there anymore. Wow, okay, how much of my self-identity was tied up with those roles? When those dissolve, I think it's important to grieve and to acknowledge the loss. Maybe because I was so into, okay, what can I do in the pandemic to support and to offer and, you know, take things online. But I think the winter was a really good place just to let even that go and go, okay, go into the letting go. And now this aliveness has come. I'm a bit tired today, but just to name it, but, you know, I can feel it. There's a vibrancy again into connecting. But it's subtle at the moment. It's very subtle. It's different. I noticed myself staring with the cat last night. We were having a sort of conversation through our eyes, you know, and it was like, wow, you know, a whole other conversation going on with her at that moment. I mean, who knows what she's experiencing? She's probably just thinking, are you feeding me or not? Really? I'm trying to tell you I need my dinner. But who knows? Yeah.
Have there been other times in your life that, this dissolving and then the nothingness and then the something arriving back or something appearing, is that an experience that you've had at other times in your life in different ways?
Definitely. I mean, some of them have been, wouldn't say manufactured, but there's been a deliberate piece that I've gone to deep retreats, or I've lived on an ashram for 6 months in order to, go through some of those processes. And other times it's been just how life creates that, one's partner or something, one's partner who you live with, who was part of the business, goes walking out the door, everything dissolves. So, some of them have been forced and some of them have been brought on deliberately. So, yes, but this was different, actually. I must admit, this winter was but maybe that was because of the whole pandemic as well, and that, was part of the mix. Yes, certainly there have been times of dissolvings and then an aliveness. And it can be very subtle as well, even on a workshop, you go in there thinking, oh, really? Really, I'm really knackered. And then after 5 minutes of shaking or moving, you're suddenly going, oh, okay. What was that about then? Because I'm feeling really alive now. So, I think life is that constant tidal breath, it's breath in and out. But sometimes the breath or the tide is very short, and sometimes it's like months on end.
And I love how we can tell ourselves the story of we know what's going on. I remember once coming to one of the deep retreats. I was knackered when I was arriving. I was so exhausted, and I was just like, all I could do was get there. And I sort of had this inner dialogue going on, well, I'll get there, and I don't have any expectations of myself when I get there. And in our opening circle, I said something like, and I think I might be very quiet this weekend because I'm very tired and I've nothing to say. And of course, like after that first hour, with just the release of it, of arriving, it's like I was singing and dancing all weekend, that it was the complete opposite. But that for me, what I would say is what I recognize in myself is the one in me who feels like she has to manage and push and she gets exhausted. So when the identity is exhausted from too much managing and pushing, she will shut me down physically, that my body then will begin to collapse or whatever. And that there's something about arriving in that circle with the love and the support and the nurturing, and I don't have to do anything, that it was like, oh, she can go on holiday now for a few days. So when she's out the building and she's not running the show for me, that actually the life force is here. Yes. So I kind of remembering back to how you started, and when you talked about these sort of doorways that we close down ourselves. So in those aspects of my identity, I shut myself down, for whatever reason, whatever the little drama that is going on inside. Yeah. But I'm doing it to myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what fascinates me about people who come, and I'm not saying specifically to you now about that particular moment, but sometimes people come and they're very, very tired. And that permission just to rest, just to let go, to have no expectations on oneself, to see what arises, often is the piece that brings the aliveness again. It doesn't always, there are people, and I have experienced that, where they are so tired. They have been pushing for so long. They actually do need to sleep for 4 days and not do anything. But most of the time, it's that release, as you named, that brings, it's like we've been holding, and that takes so much effort in itself. Excuse me, I'm back to cough. That effort of holding in and holding on is so knackering in itself. To suddenly be given permission to let go, be with what is. Yeah, just breathe. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, I'm sure you don't because of your own awareness, but I certainly notice myself still not breathe, shallow breathing sometimes, and it's like, okay, really breathe, so all these different ways that we lock and hold are just the ways that the life force gets shut down, shut in, shut out.
Yeah, I recognize that in myself and others, of this almost withholding breath from myself. Really is what the experience is, that I monitor that, or I can just make that really little to keep myself alive. Like, I don't want to die, but I'll just have just enough. Yeah. And I equate that as well. One of the when I run my course, we talk about space, both our experience of inner space, outer space, how we take up space. Yeah. And there's something again that I see particularly in female bodies, and the sort of how we are in space with our bodies. Just even that if I take a smaller breath, I'm taking up less space here. Yeah. So my space is this small, so I take a smaller breath. So it's so culturally conditioned in all of the bodies I see around me that, even without the identity playing in, I'm already mirroring that anyway, of just keeping myself small.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my work, isn't it? Exactly. Not to keep people small, but to do that. Yeah. It's like take up space, whether it's the speaking space, whether it's the naked voice space, whether it's physical space. It's like again, we have been conditioned, and we've allowed ourselves to be conditioned to being certain ways. As women, where I don't know, maybe generations after me are different, but in my generation, women had to be generally a certain way. I mean, I went into nuclear physics, and I remember one conference, I was the only other woman. There was one woman who was much, much older than me, and there was me. I was 26 at a conference full of men, and I presented myself in a certain way in order to be accepted. Now that was one particular role that I sort of felt I had to fit into, but we're doing it all the time. There's cultural signals, there's commercial signals, as we know. There's huge amounts of conditioning that goes on. What I love, what I'm seeing and loving, is seeing parents these days in certain circumstances that are just allowing their children to be, really be. I mean, I'm living next door to someone whose child does naked voice on a big level, not from pain, not from trauma. I mean, I'm sure it is sometimes that they've wanted something and they haven't got it, but just that beauty of that expression, that fullness of their life force. And, I love it. I'm like, well, maybe at 3 a.m, it can be an interesting, tricky maneuver, but, it's like, wow, that is so brilliant. Hats off to parents who are doing that, Yeah.
Yeah, something that stands out for me is a conversation we had, I'd say, when Oscar was little, and he's big energy in the world, and my feeling that as a parent I needed to contain. And I wasn't thinking of it as a limit or a restricting. I was thinking of it as a caretaking, that I need to be bigger than him to be able to keep him safe. And I maintained that for a couple of years until I couldn't contain him anymore, because he's so much bigger than me in loudness, energy, everything. He's almost up to my shoulder, and he's only 6, so he's still got a puppy energy, but he's big. And it mirrors for me all the time where I still find it difficult. And that's the mirror for myself of how I still restrict my own self as well. But that he really pushes me on it, of like, I'm too big to be contained. And even if I'm trying, he's breaking through, you know. And it's something that I see and I hear in parents saying this a lot of, you know, trying to win. It's like a sort of sense of duty that to be a good parent, I need to be on top of everything, which means I need to be kind of have everything under my wing. And already even in my body, I feel my face changing, there's tension in my body, because that's the effort again of I need to hold all of this now, hold myself and hold this other person outside of me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a great point, isn't it? Because these things aren't necessarily done from, you know, a sort of nastiness, or it's often been done from love, or what we think is love. You know, for a child not to be suddenly ridiculed or stand out or fill in the gaps, you know, whatever it might be. I've not been a parent biologically, so I don't feel like I have much permission to talk about this. But yeah, the conditioning comes in sometimes subtly, you know, or inadvertently, you know. It's like, sure, there's the trauma of a child witnessing something tragic going on and wanting to scream and go, but doesn't, because they know that's dangerous, to the child who has just poured their heart out for 4 hours drawing something amazing, but mum's also got another 1-year-old to feed, and, you know, maybe husband's coming back as well, and, you know, and the child sort of holds the picture up going, Mum, you know, and mum says, oh, not now, you know. And it's not done from any nastiness, you know, it's just like, it's full on for mum. But in that moment, the child goes, maybe internally, oh, what's the point then? What's the point in following my love and my energy and my life force? Nobody's going to see it. I'm not seen, I'm not heard. Okay. So, you know, it happens to us all in all these different forms, inadvertently, as I keep saying, I can't say that word very well, to, you know, to trauma in a big sense. Yeah.
So in your life, Jules, were there sort of key moments of you almost like noticing your own conditioning or the things that were holding you back, or, you know, depending on your own childhood and the sort of social setting as you grew up, things that were limiting, or you had a lot of freedom? You know, how was it for you coming to this really and understanding this?
Well, Naked Voice was was one of the biggies for me, because I think until then, as much as I'd been working with sound, I was a sort of sound healer, and I was working with all that energetic healing processes. The permission to suddenly make a lot of noise, in my case, just opened probably Pandora's box, let's say, you know. Yeah, that was huge. That was one of those moments. And I remember very specifically, it was the end of a retreat of Chloe Goodchild's, and we were all invited onto the stage to offer something, you know, and there were all these, what I would call creative souls. It was singers, and I was thinking, oh no, not me. And something compelled me to go up, and I went into this Naked Voice performance piece that was nothing like I'd ever done before, and that just was the unlocking of the dam, really. And I notice it still goes on, you know, when I'm in situations online, particularly at the moment, obviously, you know, in groups that I don't know, because I've deliberately put myself into other places other than leader in this last few months, particularly. So people wouldn't know me. And I notice you know, the clamping in. It's very interesting. So I've been working with that. I mean, I do think one of my old stories is I have a dyslexia with language. So to articulate, this is why these things like podcasts are a little edge for me, to articulate in the moment when there isn't a script you're following, you don't know what's going to come from the questions asked to you, or or even from yourself, I notice that's an edge still for me, you know, and hey, it is what it is. Where that came from in my childhood, I don't know, other than I was an only child. I was brought up abroad. I didn't really have much companionship at all. I was very, I went to school, but, you know, my outside of school time was very alone. And my father was never there. He was working. And my mother was ill a lot. So whether that had anything to do with it, I had to be quite quiet. You know, it's the sort of, you know, little girls are seen but not heard stuff. Who knows? And I don't really even need to unpack it. I'm just aware of the process. In this last few months particularly, it's been quite strong. And it's like, oh, okay, another level of that vulnerability coming up, you know. And yeah. And there are times after I've spoken, you know, after the calls, I go, oh, really, you know, what did I say, or what happened, or I just notice, you know. But you know,
I'm thinking about how people use that phrase of, you know, letting the sound through, letting the words come through. Who knows from where? But it's the phrase that is used often.
Yeah.
And is there a process for you around just trusting that when you're in that space, in whatever format that it's set up, that whatever you say, even though you don't know at the time why you're saying it, and you might never know what resonance it's going to have for other people. But there's something about that shared field that if we can just open to when we need to speak and speak the words that are coming through, that's what we need to speak, or something like that.
Yeah. That poem, D.H. Lawrence, you know, the song for a man who has come through, not I, but the wind that blows through me. I won't speak the whole poem, but, you know, that to me is such a gift that each of us can bring. That's the whole point. It's like if we can bring our truth and our aliveness in any one moment, although it might be tricky on a personality level, we might feel like, oh, gosh, that went down like a lead balloon. Interesting, you know. And I noticed one of those moments in a group, probably I think it was January, I said something and, you know, you could feel even on Zoom the lead balloon dropping. It's like, and yet it opened a doorway later on, a couple of weeks later, for somebody else to speak something. And it's like, we never know. And it might take 10 years. We will never know sometimes. And it's that thing about the personality as well that wants to be liked, wants to be loved, wants to belong, you know, whatever it is. And just the uncomfortableness of being the wind that blows through you. And the personality that goes, oh, you know, it's a journey.
Yeah, great.
It's all a journey.
So poetry has become a really big part of what you offer and part of your life, working with Kim Rosen in the last, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, 10 years maybe?
Longer than that now.
Okay.
Probably 14, 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So and because that's the breath, and it's the language as well, and the imagery on the language, and you learn the poems by heart, and there's a whole process for you as you're learning that and then offering them. So I've had poetry dives with you where I've received the poems as a kind of sound bath, you know. How important is poetry to you, and how does that play out in your own life, and both in what you offer as well?
I think it was one of those doorways that opened and unlocked because of my resistance to language for so long. You know, the dyslexic writing of words was really, you know, not comfortable, or the speaking. And then poetry brought in that linking, and I'm just doing this movement. It's like the link between the left and the right brain. It was the ability to work with the inner to the outer. So that's, to me, one of the joys of poetry. It's like when you read a poem that you suddenly go, oh my goodness, that just explains it. I remember I was walking with grief of a friend a couple of years ago, and I came across the poem Adrift by Mark Nepo, and I couldn't believe it. It was like there was my medicine at that moment, because everything was beautiful, and yet I was feeling this deep sadness. And this is the poem. It's like, you know, everything is beautiful and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet between wonder and grief. The light splaying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibres of memory winding a web around the knot in my throat. And it goes on. I won't speak the whole poem because of time, but you know, that was what was going on for me. It was like I was experiencing wonder and grief at the same time, and it was like I found this poem and I just took it in for months, and it was like, oh, you know. And this year, you know, in the dark moments, in a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood, a lord of nature weeping to a tree. I live between the heron and wren, beasts of the hill, serpents of the den. And again, I'm not going to speak the whole poem, but you know, it's like that was it. It was like I was walking with this process around grief for the world, and it was pretty dark, and there was it. And it goes on, it does resolve it in the end, so there's the good bit at the end, so to speak. So to me, poetry is a bridge between the inner and the outer, whether it's somebody else's words or your own words that can come forth from poetry inspired by others. And also this bridging of the neural pathways of metaphor and imagery and rhythm and the word. And I have found it incredibly healing in many different ways for me personally. And I experience that with others as well. So, you know, hats off to Kim Rosen, big time, for coming over the waves all those many years ago and sitting in a small yurt up on the borders, it was, between Wales and England. And, you know, and starting that alchemy off. It's incredible for me, poetry for me. And I experience it with others. I can see and hear for others how it is bridging that inner to the outer, and the non-language and the language. And I mean, you'll know this because you are such a wordsmith and language person, but for me, there is the alchemy of the spoken word that provides a field for someone of potency. So yeah, I think poetry is an amazing gift.
For me, poetry comes the closest to, apart from sound, to resonating with my actual experience, you know, and it is through the metaphor. And the poetry I love is the poetry I can feel. You know, and I feel it in my body, and I don't necessarily understand it, and I don't, you know, it kind of bypasses the part of my brain that needs to work it out, and it just lands in me or stirs something in me, but it makes contact with me. The words contact me, and I feel it in my physical body as something. And something that I talk about with Joan. So we kind of, there's lots of non-verbals, we do lots of body work, and then we're in these states of being, and we're all together, and it's very silent for a long time, and then we kind of wonder, why words? Like, why do we need words really? If I can just be here in presence with you in this place at this time. And it's like, because we want to communicate with each other. We are social creatures, and we use words to communicate and to contact each other. And through my words, through my voice, the sound of my voice, the rhythm of my voice, and then the meaning of the words are just a tiny part of that. But I'm coming towards you, and something about that, I feel myself in that as well. So I don't leave myself, because my voice is still here. I can feel the resonance still in my body now. And yet it comes across to you as well. So for me, poetry and the speaking of poetry just really feel, even tears now, the emotion of just that simplicity of just connecting with another human being, known or unknown, with some words.
And I think that's, for me, what's been missing. I mean, as much as I live with someone, so I haven't been completely isolated, but that place of that communion of breath, of body, of words, that fire that arises, that has been such a missing element for me in the last year and a half. Again, Zoom is great, and I bow to the goddess of Zoom. It's fantastic, and there is it can happen through Zoom, and it does. I've done poetry dives on Zoom, and they do work. I am amazed. And yet to be in a room with someone and to actually feel that breath, rhythm, vibration arriving, as you say, in your own somatic experience, that, I do miss that. I really miss that. And maybe that's been part of the sort of grief as well this year, of the sort of the dark time, as I call it. It's like, it's gone on for so long. And I feel very privileged. I mean, I'm, not in a tricky position compared to a lot of people in the last year, but
So I wonder if there is a poem that you'd like to share with us now, and maybe we would complete then, if there's something here now.
Okay, this is a poem by Nina Kassen called Temptation. Call yourself alive. I promise you, you will feel your own pores opening like fish mouths. You will hear all your blood surging through all those lanes. And light will glide like the dress across your cornea. And light will glide like the train of a dress across your cornea. Call yourself alive. Finally, you will feel gravity like a thorn in your heel, and your shoulder blades will ache for the want of wings. Call yourself alive. Call yourself alive. I promise you. I promise you. You will hear the dust falling on the furniture. Your two eyebrows turning to gashes. And every memory you have will begin at Genesis. Call yourself alive. I love that line. Call yourself alive. Finally, you will feel gravity like a thorn in your heel, and your shoulder blades will ache for the want of wings. Temptation by Nina Kassen. Probably not completely correct, but hey, it was close. I think that poem, when that came in, I was starting to experience that feeling of the thorn in your heel. It's like suddenly feeling gravity. There was a particular process I was in at the time involving the body, that I felt that aliveness and that gravity. It was like, wow. And that poem just arrived around that time, and it was like, yeah, I get it. It's like, this is aliveness when this is happening, when you hear your blood in your veins, you feel it. And you also see and feel and experience that life force emanating from everything. I still claim I don't understand the last few lines of that poem. I'm still working with it. But, that's it. Maybe that's it. It's the Genesis piece. It's like everything has life force. And if you're calling yourself alive, that's what you experience. Yeah.
And right now, what's landing for me is, in our body, every second is new, that our cells are regenerating. Every second, there's new cells, new. So we are always at that point of origin.
Yeah.
Really. Now and now and now and now, but it's in our bodies. So, for me, the idea that we have to go out of our bodies and feel the great big energy out there, up there, it's like, no, it's here. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right here, and you can feel it if you can just stop and just come in and listen.
Yeah. Instead of having the antennae, as I would call it, of our bodies turned outwards for vigilance, which, on some level was necessary and maybe still is, there are places I probably would want my antennae out on vigilance in the world. But instead of them being turned out from that defense place, that aliveness allows them, I think, in my own experience, to turn outwards in connection. And to me, that is the beauty of being here in a body alive. Yeah, like you said, it's not, for me, it's not transcendence. There is something about that connection, that vertical connection, as you mentioned earlier, that's important, so that we don't just identify with what we think is our personality, but that connection to everything in this body, here now, with you, with the cat, with the moor, yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's great. It's always such a pleasure talking with you, Tracy. I remember the very first conversation in the office meeting, actually, which wasn't in an office. It was in the Arts Centre in Pontardawe. And I remember that conversation going, oh, yes, this is a great conversation to be having with someone, So it's always a joy and a pleasure to have these conversations. And sometimes we know where they're heading and sometimes we don't. Sometimes they've ended up in collaborations on the platforms and stages of the world, But it's always a pleasure. So thank you for that.
Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel it?